I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I wasn't. Hello everyone. I am Shraddha Uttekar. For those who are still joining us, I welcome you all on behalf of Childhood Foundation. Before we move on to our next program of today's event, in fact, for the most awaited part of today's event, I would like to go over a few items. All the participants are requested to drop their questions in Q&A box only. Questions posted in chat box won't be considered. As we have already a list of questions received in advance, and the questions from Q&A box will be addressed after that. Without any further ado, I welcome Dr. Balwandan Khadia, President of Indian Medical Association, Gandhidham branch, for the opening remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Khadia.
Thank you. Thank you. I am Dr. Balwandan Khadia, President of IMA Gandhidham. It's my immense pleasure to have such a webinar that includes almost more than 80 countries, and we have 1,200 registrations for the same. I'm really proud for that. A small branch of IMA Gandhidham is organizing such a webinar with support of the Child Health Foundation. So I am welcome all the participants. I welcome all our booth speakers, Dr. T. Jacob John sir and Dr. Arora sir. I also welcome the chairman, Vipin sir and Dr. Naveen sir. So I think since last 2 years, we have so many questions and we are still in a confusion stage, from diagnosis to management to vaccination and further management. Now from COVID to Delta to Omicron to mixed old COVID, new COVID. So today we have so many questions. I think it is much more than expected. So we will enjoy this webinar. I again welcome all from the holy land of Kutch, Gujarat, India. Jai Ma. Welcome to all.
I welcome Dr. Anju Rani for introducing our faculties and moderators. Over to you, Dr. Anju.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Go ahead.
I'm audible? Oh,
yes,
yeah.
Very much. The video is not on.
Yeah,
but
good evening, everyone.
Yeah.
Good
Now
evening,
video is
everyone.
also.
It's an honor of mine to introduce such a immense, eminent people, speakers, and moderators. First, I'll introduce our faculties, speakers, and moderators. First, I'll introduce Sir Dr. Jacob John. He is a living legend. I think everyone knows him well. So, in fact, does not need an introduction. He is the topmost virologist and emeritus professor of CMC. He has served as president of Indian Academy of Pediatrics and Indian Association of Medical Microbiologists as a chairperson and as a chairperson of Child Health Foundation from its inception. He is the name behind the success of program Pulse Polio Immunization. He had solved the mystery of disease of Saranpur, Uttar Pradesh, Muzaffarpur, Bihar, and Malkangiri, Odisha. He has more than 1,000 of papers on his name. Now I'll introduce other faculty, other speaker of today, Dr. N.K. Arora. N.K. Arora, sir, is the executive director of INCLAN Trust International. He chairs the Scientific Advisory Group, Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, on COVID-19 related vaccine, diagnostic and therapeutic development. He has been involved in drafting the revised National Adverse Event Following Immunization vaccine safety related surveillance guidelines for COVID-19 vaccine in India. Now it's time to introduce our moderators of today's session. As first, Dr. Naveen Thakkar, sir. He is again a well-known name, well-known personality by name and his work. Dr. Naveen Thakkar is President-elect of International Pediatric Association, and he is Secretary of Child Health Foundation. He is former President of Asia Pacific Pediatric Association, and he has been National President of Indian Academy of Pediatrics. He has served as CSO representative on Gavi Ward for 4 years. He was listed amongst the top influencer for the fight against polio released by UNICEF. Another moderator of today's session, Dr. Vipin Vashisht. He is a renowned pediatrician and Vice Chairperson of Child Health Foundation. He is Editor-in-Chief of IAP textbook on vaccines. He is Editor-in-Chief of another book named Vaccines and Mutation, which is in press. He is member of WHO Safety Net. So it's like, again, my pleasure to introduce all of you dignitaries. So I'll request Dr. Jacob John sir to start his information to us.
Thank you, Dr. Anjurani. Thank you so much. Dr. Anjurani is our academic advisor for Indian Medical Association. Vipin, over to you to start the session. Vipin, you are here.
You are muted, Vipin.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
very much.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. So we start with this proceeding of webinar and interactive session as far as COVID and COVID vaccines are concerned. I think we have a very eminent panel with us, as have already been introduced by the previous speaker. And we have Dr. Jacob John and Dr. Arora. Both are multifaceted personality. And they are wearing different hats. For example, Dr. Jacob John is not only the reputed virologist, he is an epidemiologist, a vaccinologist, a public health expert, and a pediatrician, of course. And similarly, Dr. Arora is an international vaccine expert, a public health strategist, as a pediatrician, as well as a pathologist also. So we are facing two most talented, versatile, and multifaceted personality for today's discussion. And without wasting much time, because I have a long list of questions in front of me, more than 100 questions, that will be tough task to do justice to all these queries. I straight away ask Dr. Jacob John, sir. So you have been changing viruses throughout your life. How would you reckon SARS-CoV-2? Is it behaving the way viruses are supposed to behave, or is it an outlier? This is a general question, sir. Please.
You're right. I have been studying many viruses, but never expected a virus like SARS coronavirus to become a pandemic agent. We are used to influenza, and we have had 1957, 1968, 2009 pandemics. So a respiratory transmitted, globally spreading virus, we expected influenza, but not a beta coronavirus. But here it is, reality. So we better learn to face it.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Vipin, can I ask? So, sir,
Yeah, just
coming directly to Omicron, because today our topic is also that. So, and everyone has question, and there are a lot of, quotes, information, experts are taking, calling it the transmissibility is very high, but the severity will be less. So, can you there are many questions people have asked, about all these things, how it will behave when what do you expect when there will be peak, whether it will cause severe disease, whether, all these questions. Can you just in, opening, you can address these questions, so that will be, that's the audience want to know.
Let me introduce Dr. Omicron to you. All the rest of the questions can follow. The SARS coronavirus type 2, after it emerged and began spreading, it has shown to us its pattern of behavior in terms of disease, spread, and mutations. Being a single-stranded RNA virus, mutations are expected. And the mutations are step by step. We all know how the polio vaccine virus mutates. The mutations are by and large conserved. So one mutation followed by a second mutation, another third mutation. So you can trace back the lineage of that mutational progression. So that's how we have many mutations, of which alpha, beta, gamma, delta have been called mutations of concern, either because it spreads faster than the previous variants, or it overcomes immunity to a certain extent, or its pathogenicity is more than the previous versions. This is the variant of concern. And all these have been a bit surprising to us. Another surprise was that we thought we knew a lot about immunity. When it comes to the COVID-19's immunity, we had to relearn the many issues regarding the natural immunity and natural protection. But there is a pattern that we have been following. Omicron or Omicron, whichever way you pronounce it, doesn't fit into that pattern. Omicron is an outlier in the line of progressive additional step-by-step mutations. The most important structural part of the virus that we are worried about is the spike protein, because the spike protein is the one that fits to the cell receptor, and the cell receptor part of the cell surface has to recognize something which is the cell takes it as a normal ligand, because ACE2 is meant for a physiological function. So that's what the body thinks. So the virus gets attached to the receptor, and then what happens? All the variants that we have learned about have one particular way of behavior. Omicron does not fit into that behavior, and I will very briefly explain that to you. Once the receptor is stimulated by the attachment of the coronavirus, there is a cleavage of the S1, S2 portion using our own cell's enzyme, and a second enzyme, it's called TMPR RSS2, so don't worry about that. It's also a cellular enzyme, results in fusion of the virus envelope with the cell surface. So it's a cell surface fusion, and in that process, the cell surface there is a proteolytic process, and that results in the neighboring adjacent cells that touch the infected cell also joins in the process. And so all the neighboring cells, several of them lose their identity. They become one large giant cell with multiple nuclei. That's what we call syncytium. The syncytium formation is highly relevant for pathogenesis, particularly lung involvement, lung pathology, pneumonia, hypoxemia, and further spread to many other organs. This entry process is not followed by Omicron. Omicron, first it attaches to the receptor, and then the receptor virus complex, as a natural process of the cell, would be taken in by something called endocytosis. We know phagocytosis by phagocytic cells. It's a similar process that the cell membrane with this material, assuming it was something that has to be taken into the cell, takes it in, endocytosis. Once the endocytotic vesicle enters the cytoplasm, there are endosomes, organelles in the cytoplasm that will try to digest this intruding substance that the cell is trying to clean up. And so now the virus surface of the virus envelope fuses with the endosome. So the endosomal fusion of the virus is what happens as far as Omicron is concerned. Because this fusion is inside the cell, there is no syncytium formation. And if there is no syncytium formation, lung pathology is least likely. Anoxemia, pneumonia, ARDS, all those are manifestations of the pathology that starts with the formation of syncytia. So right at that virus cell interaction, Omicron is quite different from all the rest of the variants that we know of. Now, when you look at the mutations also, on S1 portion and on the receptor binding domain of the S protein, alpha, beta, gamma, delta have 1 or 2 specific site mutations. But Omicron has 15. Without going through what we expect, 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that accumulation of mutations is missing. Therefore, it's a mystery as to how from 2 to 3, it can jump to 15 in the RBD. On the S1 protein, from 15, it has jumped to 32 to 37. So there is a big jump this Omicron has taken, and that mystery has not been solved. But the possibilities are, one, it was mutating in some community where there was no surveillance. Quite unlikely, because it should take such a long time for this kind of mutation. The second is that in one immunosuppressed person like HIV infected, it grew over a long period of time and then accumulated mutations. Possible, but doesn't sound real. The third possibility is that the coronavirus infected an animal species. And in the animal species, the mutational speed is not like inside the human cells. So a lot of things could change, and there are the species-specific adjustments, adaptation. And so this seems to be adapted to some animal host. In other words, the reverse zoonosis might have happened, that the human coronavirus, the SARS coronavirus infected an animal species, and all this drama of mutations happened in the animal species, and then it ended back human beings, and you have Omicron. That seems to be the best explanation. And if you look at the mutations very closely, it looks as if it is a rodent host mutational pattern. So that is the likely channel is that human to mouse, back mouse to humans over a period of about a year maybe. If it went to the mouse in 2020, end 2020, it appeared towards the end of 2021. So these are all mostly speculations, some laboratory evidence, but the pathogenetic processes are different, and therefore you see difference in clinical presentation and the presence of viruses or virions or viruses on the tissues. And Omicron is predominantly mucosal surface infection, inefficient in multiplication, cell entry and multiplication, so that the spread is muted. It doesn't seem to reach the alveoli and cause much pathology in the lungs. And very interestingly, nasal swab versus a good oral salivary swab, the salivary swab has more viruses picked up by RT-PCR than the nasal swab. So there are this kind of anomalous or unexpected novelty of the pattern of Omicron. So there is genetic variation, there is the cell entry pathogenesis variation, there is clinical variation, there is variation in also overcoming past immunity due to other variants or due to vaccination that we use the original spike protein of the founder variant. So immune dodging or evasion, the most successful immune evader is Omicron, better than any other variant. All these put together, just for our understanding, it's not simply a variant in a continuum of variations and mutations. It stands out. So I have coined the term, just for our understanding, it's a deviant, not a variant. It's almost like a subtype or a subspecies. There are biological and as I have described, many differences. So Omicron is a little bit of an enigma, but the good news is that its pathogenicity is muted. The bad news is that it escapes the previously created immunity. And as I said in the beginning, the immunity and protection for SARS coronavirus is unexpectedly fragile. We didn't expect it to be so, because most viruses, immunity is relatively good and solid. Influenza takes more than a year, and mutations, antigenic drift so that you need a new vaccine at the end of the year. Some years you don't need a new vaccine. Whereas here, in a few months, you're getting mutants for which, and the immunity dodging is becoming more and more prominent. So far, we knew Delta was the most difficult one in terms of immune evasion, but the Omicron is the class apart. It has evaded immunity right across. If you had 2 doses of almost any good vaccine, you have about 70% of protection against hospitalization requiring Omicron infection. If you wait for 6 months, it comes down to below 50%. If you give a booster, it goes up to about 90%. These are British data. So, because even though the affinity of antibody antigen meeting each other is low, if you can raise the antibody level very high, there are enough antibodies, and even though the affinity is low, more viruses will be detected and bound by the antibody, and you can improve the protective immunity. Okay, back to you, Naveen.
Thank you, sir. Very good explanation. Vipin?
Yes, sir. So very excellently explained, Dr. Jacob John, sir, the whole pathogenesis related thing. And so we know that why this Omicron is less pathogenic or intrinsically less pathogenic to the human beings, and is going to cause less of lung disease. Dr. Jacobson, one question before I come to Dr. Arora, sir. Do you think it can change the other, what could be the other implication? You told about the change of entry into the cell. What could be the other explanation? One implication. First is the less severe lung disease or less incidence of lung pathology. What could be other? Could it be other tissue tropism to other tissues of the body? Because it is quite early. We don't have too many hospitalized Omicron patients, if you think of.
I do not expect or suspect that the lower pathogenicity it hides some tissue problem in the body. I think it's the whole disease is an attenuated disease. But on the epidemiology, almost everybody will get infected. It's airborne, and for some reason, it's so highly infectious that you must expect everybody to be exposed or get infected. So what we expect is a massive infection wave which will be invisible, because 80, 85, 90% of infections would be either asymptomatic or very mildly symptomatic, just sore throat for 3-4 days, not even cough, some nasal stuffiness or discharge, and then you recover. So you will not even, many people will not even suspect it's a coronavirus infection. So that is the background, going to be massive wave of infection, unrecognized in terms of the spread or the volume.
Yeah.
A small subset will have disease, they will be tested, and if you concentrate on those, you have to face a wave of disease which requires hospitalization, and the same immunological compromise due to old age and comorbidities and immunosuppressive diseases or treatment will put you at risk of severe disease requiring hospitalization and some ICU care. But in general, the whole thing is shifted to the left, that everything that I said would be less, far less in numbers than the Delta variant. Finally, Delta overtook almost all other variants. Alpha, beta, gamma virtually disappeared because Delta swallowed the whole thing up because of the competitiveness. Will Omicron do that? I will not make a prediction. My suspicion is that both Delta and Omicron will survive in the community, and it is possible, even probable, that we may need vaccines for the standard variants on the one side and Omicron or its variations that we cannot predict now, variants that might happen. You may need to have a second set of vaccines for that. That is, we'll have to wait and see how things pan out to be. They are unpredictable. For the time being, we have just started increase in numbers of cases, which hides the increase in numbers of infections. It will steeply rise and rapidly come down. That is to be expected right now.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you. Thank you, very well explained, sir. Dr. Arora, sir, now we see India is right now having two different variants. Delta is still there, it is not disappeared. So it is very important to distinguish between Delta infection and the Omicron infection, because you see, one is the disease pathology, another is the disease treatment part. It is also very important because still in India we don't have a monoclonal antibodies. But could you please tell us something about the testing part? How can we differentiate between Delta infection and Omicron? Does the current RT-PCRs are capable of distinguishing between these two, or these rapid antigen tests? Dr. Arora.
And just Vipin, to add to Dr. Arora, if there is any pattern of symptomatology different, if you have any data on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vipin and Naveen. So, thank you, Professor Jacob John, for elaborately describing the virology part of it. So, coming to Indian scenario, INSACOG has been doing genomic surveillance from December last year. That means 2020. And what we saw was that in May, June, July, almost 90% was Delta. And then August onwards, gradually so-called Delta Plus or AY series started expanding in the different parts of the country. And in November, almost 50% was Delta, and another 50% was this so-called Delta Plus or AY series, and which has sublineages, almost 150 or 200 sublineages. Now, when we look at the recent data from same INSACOG surveillance network, what we find is that overall in the country, where 50-50 was existing, in the week of 21st December, it was 12% was Omicron, and the remaining half and a half was the other two. In the last week gone by, that means 28 to 2nd January, it became 28%. So 2.5 times almost increase of Omicron nationally. But focused 100% genomic surveillance was done in 4 or 5 metro cities. And I am sure all of us are aware, we have heard in Delhi, 84% became Omicron and 16% was Delta. And same is true that in the other metro cities, Delta came down and Delta Plus also came down proportionately. but Omicron was between 50 and 75%. So the current upsurge of cases in the country seem to be primarily driven by Omicron. Number two, that initial 2-3 weeks, most of the cases did have a history of travel or contact with a person with travel. But last 2 weeks, there are the proportion of people who have no travel history or no contact with travel is increased. So clearly now we have widespread, and as we have seen that during last 4 days, last week it was 13,000, and today I understand it is 58,000. So very exponential increase in the number of cases have occurred. The pattern of increase is very much like what we saw with Delta. Delta started with Maharashtra and Mumbai and some of the other cities. There were 3 or 4 other districts where it started, and then started expanding to Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Haryana, and Delhi, and from north, Punjab onwards. The Alpha variant imported from UK was expanding, and it came up, but very rapidly Delta overtook Alpha, and then it started moving eastwards and southwards, and that is what seems to be, that was the reason that we had a tail of Delta epidemic till recently in northeastern states and in southern Tamil Nadu also. Till recently, Delta was the dominant reason for COVID. So at the moment, it seems to be spreading primarily on the western border, states on the western border of the country. And so to me, it appears that we are likely to see the spread very similar. And but primarily, like what we have seen in last 2 or 3 days, is Calcutta has an explosive increase. So metro cities where there is population density very high, the increase is taking place very rapidly, and metro cities means the surrounding cities, the suburban and urban areas as well. So the pattern may be quite similar like last time, but the spread is likely to be much faster. And in coming days, weeks, we will see the true nature, how rapidly it spreads. As Professor John has very rightly said, most of the cases are mild. But one thing we should not forget, that even small, so I know from Delhi that almost all of the patients who are admitted, initially patients were admitted irrespective of their severity or asymptomatic nature, because it was a pattern, it was an attempt to slow the spread. But today, those who are severe and those who are requiring ventilation, almost all of them have comorbidities. And these are the individuals. 70-75% of them have at least 1 dose of vaccine received. So breakthrough infection and reinfection is quite common. I will stop at that.
Yeah, I think if you see the current RT-PCR, I think
yes, diagnostic.
Diagnostic. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the RT-PCR takes care of 3 genes, and the N gene is quite stable, and so is the ORF gene. It is the S gene which has kind of mutated so much. So S gene dropout, you must have heard, but the regular RT-PCR picks up all of them. So there is no false negative as far as RT-PCR. Within the constraints and limitations of RT-PCR, it's about 70% sensitivity or so, and depending on the viral load, it picks up similarly to the previous variants. Now there is another issue, that the Omicron has 2 sublineages. 1 and 2. 1 is about 70% and 2 is about 30%. And the second lineage, BY2, is picked up. It does not have S gene dropout. So you must have heard yesterday, ICMR has released in partnership with Tata a kit which picks up S gene dropout cases. That is fine, but we should understand that at the moment it appears in the country there is a 30-70% kind of a ratio between those who have S gene dropout, 70%, and those do not have S gene dropout, which is 30%. So we need to keep these things in mind. Having said all this, as far as treatment is concerned, I think for severe cases and those requiring hospitalization is very, very much similar, except that if it is Omicron, none of the monoclonals is going to work. I think that we need to, and otherwise also monoclonals have not been very effective. So that is a issue that we need to, that those who are hospitalized, unnecessarily loading them with monoclonals is unlikely to be helpful.
Yeah,
Oh.
thank you, sir. I think one monoclonal which is not, I think, available in India is Sotrovimab, which is effective against Omicron. Other one from the Eli Lilly and Regeneron, they are not very effective. So it is again an important thing to know whether we are dealing with a case of Omicron or Delta. And the current, those RT-PCR which are testing only two genes, ORF1ab and the nucleocapsid, they may fail to pick up. As Dr. Arora said, there are three sub-lineages of Omicron, 1, 2, and 3. And 2 is coming up in India as well as in Denmark, and it does not have spike gene target failure, so it may not help you in that way also. So we need to rely on sequencing, but it is a tedious process, may take 1 week or so. So we have to keep a very high degree of suspicion, and we need to have certain kits, rapid kits to know whether we are dealing with Omicron or this Delta one. Coming to the symptomatology, I think the important symptoms with the Omicron are basically you have now a scratchy throat, you have a headache, very severe headache, joints pains are there, and exhaustion, severe exhaustion, cold is there. But the other characteristic of other variants like loss of smell and taste, they are particularly, most likely they are absent in cases of Omicron. This is another clue. I was going through the Norway data, they found that in 50% of cases there's no fever. Dr. Arora, there's a lot of messages going on social media that if you are having Omicron, it's in fact a blessing in disguise, and it should act as a live attenuated vaccine. And people are talking that you should not go for testing of all the cases. How do you see this thing happening, that people are advising that if you are having only mild symptoms, please do not test it? How good or bad is for the society?
Vipin, I will add one thing for Dr. Arora and maybe Dr. Jacob John, that second thing is that considering that, the message that it's a mild and it may be a therapy vaccine, work like a vaccine and blessing in disguise. So, and people may also not go for the boosters. So Dr. Arora, you are the architect of, recommendation which are coming up. What do you also say about the vaccines? Those people have taken vaccines, and how useful it will be if you roll out from 13th or 14th. And by that time, Omicron will be everywhere. So how do you see that? And both the things, if you can answer. Thank you.
So I'll take up the first question about the need for testing. So as very rightly said by everybody, that most of the time disease is mild, it is URI-like illness. See, individual patients having severe headache or muscle pains, joint pains, uh, or high fever without any other symptoms may look all right. But when you look at in a larger perspective, or if one is sitting in a OPD, I think on the basis of clinical features, it will be very difficult to differentiate. Yes, that's true that smell and other things are loss of smell and taste is something which is uniquely not present with this. But having said that, the question is that what should be our approach? Whole public health approach is that we should try. It's likely that because of its highly infectious nature, the virus is going to spread across the community. It looks like, because the explosive nature and the way, like yesterday in USA, there were 1 million cases. So, and this is being driven by mostly Omicron, and France 2.5 lakhs and that kind of a thing. So we are also likely to have a very similar kind of thing. The whole issue is, how do I overall, what approach should I take so that while I am able to look after all the individuals who require health care, hospitalization, ICU care, ventilator care if required, on the other hand, unnecessarily admissions and testing is also can be efficiently use all my resources. So to begin with, I would say that if we have families and where everybody is having similar symptoms, I would think that these people are having a similar syndrome. And if I get one or two of them investigated, just like epidemiological linkage is there. So if I find one or two of them positive, whether there is need for remaining 6 people in the family to be tested or not is to be seen. The second point is, the key issue is that the severity, as we are observing from India as well as from other parts, that breakthrough infection is occurring with vaccine, and reinfections are also occurring. Chief Minister of Delhi's example was given. So in situation like this, I would say that we should try to target high risk individuals who are likely to have difficulty and going into severe disease, and they must be tested. And that means if I am having an elderly or somebody who is having comorbidities or immunosuppressed or immunocompromised individuals, they should be tested, and if it is positive, then they need to be looked after very closely. And today the national guidelines have come up, and particularly who are those at high risk, immunosuppressed, immunocompromised, or multiple comorbidities. Probably it may be good to be under close supervision of a treating physician, and if required, early admission is required in them. The other part of the question is about the vaccine and so-called additional dose or precautionary dose. Very rightly said before that most of the vaccines have not been able to contain the spread of Omicron. Reinfections and breakthrough infections are occurring across the world. Countries with high coverage of 2 doses, high coverage of boosters, it is occurring there also. So what is the benefit of vaccine? The benefit of the vaccine is that risk of severity and risk of need for hospitalization, risk of need for ventilation is decreased anywhere between 40 to 60%. And therefore vaccination has benefit. And we are in a unique position. If you look at South Africa, where natural infection was very much like us, 70-80%. We have around 80%. But vaccine coverage was just about 20% or so. But they have done particularly well that although the cases increased, hospitalization increased, but there was a decoupling of death and cases. So we need to look at that that vaccination must continue. Those who have received only one dose should go in for second dose, and those who are adults who have not received. Regarding the precautionary dose, it has been done basically to provide additional precaution or protection for health workers, frontline workers, and 60 plus, primarily with the focus that if it is possible to get infected, or second is that in case, as very rightly said, that if antibodies are increased, the risk of severe disease is likely to come down. So that's why 60 plus and comorbidities there. But vaccination still has a role, primary role. How much boosters are going to give additional help? The global data is really not convincing that it is providing any additional benefit if somebody is boosted.
Thank you, Dr. Arora. Now, there are a few questions that have come up after the Government of India decision to give booster to frontline workers and some elderly groups. First of all, why did you keep this 9 months from the last dose? Because we have seen waning occurring after 5 months, 4 months, or 5 months. First. Second, regarding the, we should have started a bit early, because we are seeing now the plenty of doctors, they are getting infected. The Omicron is just like a blazing fire in the community, and we have seen the many doctors, they are having these Omicron infection. Had it been started a bit earlier, say, why did it take so long to come up with this booster dose recommendation? And the third part of my question is regarding this, the latest recommendation, which has said the government is going to use the homologous dose for the booster also, where we have seen that in certain parts of the world, and most of the, even WHO has recommended it's better to give heterologous as a booster dose.
I
Yes,
will add, Dr. Arora, I will add about the children. I heard that you have, why 15 years? Why not younger? And there are questions in chat box, and many of our now children are asking us, "Mera number kab aayega?" So yesterday, 8-year-old girl was asking me, "Uncle, mere ko vaccine kab milegi?" So why not? And whatever data, if we wait for the only data from the India, and in past we have many, most of the time, few years back we have extrapolated. So now data coming from other countries that children are getting infected. Children get some, definitely less, but children get hospitalized. Children also transmit disease, may not be as adults, but they do transmit, and some of them also die. And all this is much more than the routine, what UIP we are giving. The burden is much more than that. So why not? The childhood vaccination was always our strength. So why not we are going below 15 years of age? And again, if you are giving 2 Covaxin doses, and after that, and by that time, Omicron will be over. So there are other questions our pediatrician wants to, and other parents wants to know. What will be the, we talk a lot about the children affecting more in the third wave. So what is, what do we know that, and how we are going to protect if we, started vaccination now, and it will take time, and by that time Omicron may be over. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the question of, first of all, why this decision of 9 months, number one. So data which we have collected from the CoWIN platform, and there are 2 other studies which have shown that risk of reinfection or breakthrough infection was increasing mostly after 9 months. So from a public health point of view, occasional breakthrough occurs even at 3 months also. So, but it is a public health decision that 9 months is the way our community is behaving, because natural infection is so wide, asymptomatic natural infection, that breakthroughs were occurring till 9 months, very few breakthroughs, and mostly these are after that, number one. Number two, so the decision of that. The second is Vipin's question that so many of our health providers are getting Omicron infected and it will certainly compromise. So this is a very valid and a very important factor that even though it is mild infection, once somebody gets infected, and we are seeing reports from all over the country that groups of residents and people, several doctors, both junior and senior doctors are getting infected. The question is whether vaccine is able to, how much vaccine is able to prevent that. And so the decision on this whole issue was taken, and it does take 2 to 3 weeks to operationalize, and that is what was done. One additional thing which today it has been taken, the decision is taken, that quarantine period after somebody gets infected is 7 days rather than 2 weeks, because the disease is mild, and whatever data we are getting that 4th, 5th day after somebody is diagnosed, the virus detection becomes, it is not detected by RT-PCR. So the quarantine period has been reduced. 2. Number 3, about pediatric immunization. And I think, in fact, I am also pediatrician, as many of us are there. So we are worried about pediatrics. There is an issue of prioritization. We know 15 to 18, 17 are behaving almost like adults. We have 7.5 crore children. And to say that we start opening for everybody, there is a possibility that younger age children who are likely to get milder disease, otherwise also all through this 2 years we have seen. And this is the reason that gradually in a stepwise manner, we intend to go down. So all the population segments will be covered. We have seen that in last 2 days, 1.5 crore, 3 days, 1.5 crore children have been given vaccinated. So in about 20-25 days, this age group will be over. And then the decision is to be taken to keep on moving in the lower age group as we see, because prioritization is a very important component. That is a strategy adopted, that those who are likely to get severe disease should take the benefit of the vaccination first.
Thank you. Sir, you have left about this homologous and heterologous thing.
Okay, yeah, homologous, heterologous.
Yeah.
So issue is what should be done with the available vaccines. India has so far done extremely well, and we have been able to give everybody we have given everybody all the vaccine. 1.5 billion doses have been given almost, and they're all Indian manufactured. If these vaccines were not available, many of us do not realize that we would have been begging and we would have been on our knees. So we must really thank our industry and scientists that all these vaccines are manufactured, developed, many developed in India. Now, based on the studies available, Covaxin is a inactivated vaccine, and Covishield is vectored vaccine. A study is going on, and the results are likely to be available if we cross over heterologous, if it is given. And that result will be available in the mid of February. And if these results show, then we will certainly move on and change the policy.
Yeah, you see, sir.
Let me complete.
Yeah, yes.
Simultaneously, we have 2 more new vaccines, Carbovax and Covovax, which are protein subunit, and they can also be given heterologous as heterologous examples. The third thing is that we have a mRNA coming in February. That also, because global experience with heterologous is mostly with mRNA, although homologous mRNA is the most commonly used approach. Although in the homologous, the dose of mRNA is reduced to half or sometimes even less than that. So there are various options. Now, so far, what we know from global experience is that reactogenicity is higher whenever heterologous vaccine is given. And in a situation where we have such a large population and we are working we are on a platform for vaccine confidence. So far, I think India has done some of the probably one of the best in the world, that we have been able to immunize 91% of eligible adults in this country. Probably no other country has been able to do it. We don't know about China. So if reactogenicity increases, one is worried whether it will send what kind of message. So we are just waiting for scientific evidence, and as the evidence arises, the policy change it will be done as per scientific evidence. So whether it is question of crossover between Covishield and Covaxin, or use of Corbevax as additional doses, or we do Zycovir-D or mRNA vaccine.
Thank you, sir. So there another school of thought, we are still having around 35% of our susceptible population who are not given a second dose. So, and if you see these booster vaccinations, and even if you give booster, and they are going to stay up to 8 weeks or 9 weeks, we have seen in many countries, and we have seen that Israel has now started with 4th dose. So do you think it is a prudent decision, if our objective is to prevent hospitalization and deaths and severe disease, why can't we stick to the 2-dose strategy? First cover our entire susceptible population with 2 doses, and then come to, if our strategy is different, then to this booster dose. What do you say, sir?
So first of all, we are not calling it a booster dose. We are saying precautionary dose, because the value of booster has really not shown much effect. Israel may go in for the 4th dose, and Canada is also thinking of 4th dose, and 1 or 2 other countries. But whether the philosophy is to prevent infection or not hospitalization. So that's a policy decision also, that whether we want pressure on hospital system, or we are talking about absolute interruption of virus transmission. The second thing is, and whether what impact does it have in terms of vaccine escapes or selection mechanism for viruses. So the second is one important issue, and I just saw a question which came up, that interval between 2 doses of Covishield. And there has been a lot of discussion on this issue. But if we look at the original data, and the way and 90% of the Indian population has received Covishield, and even the second dose, these 56 crore people, out of that 90% are Covishield recipient. It appears that this may be, I do not have the evidence, it is totally assumption, but because of increased interval, the vaccine effectiveness in actual scenario may be much better as compared to if we had given it at 4 weeks or 8 weeks.
Thank you, sir. Coming back to Dr. Jacob John, sir, coming to this Omicron outbreak, how do you see the trajectory in India? And when do you anticipate India is going to peak? I know it is going to be a staggered distribution of outbreak in different states and different parts of the country. Yes, sir. Your speculation as far as the peaking and the type of trajectory.
Sir, this is Naveen. I want to also add that, you have explained everything, that, how it is going to be different and mostly mild. But how much we should be worried? The first question doctors and everyone is asking, how much we should be worried and what we should do. That is the topic of our discussion today. What exactly we should do? If it is mild, should I not worry and just don't take any precaution, or why I should do that if it is going to be mild? And how much I should be worried, and what about the children? Because we talked a lot and then we prepared a lot for children in 3rd wave, which got delayed, and nobody is now talking about children. Schools, the people are asking whether I should send my child to school or not. So all these are practical questions which people are looking for answers, and if they don't get it, they are going to burden the health system. So how much I should worry if I get infection? how much I should, how I can avoid and why I should avoid if it is mine. Over, sir.
Okay, I will address three issues. One is the shape of the epidemic curve, how long it will last, some kind of prediction, not a mathematical projection. Second is how much should we worry about getting infected ourselves, and what about children? We have seen two waves in the past. The original Wuhan D614G, the founder variant, took about 4 or 4.5 months to reach the peak, and another 4.5 months to reach the nadir. So it was a slow mounting and slow receding wave. Very interestingly, we are a country of 140 million people, and we behaved as if we are one large village because of this uniform pattern of rise and fall, with the exceptions of Kerala, Sikkim, Meghalaya, Mizoram. If you remove those, the rest of the country behaved as if it was one large unit. Metropolitan areas first, then suburban and villages in fairly quick sweep. Then we saw the second wave of Delta, started by late March, peaked in early May, and came down by early July. The whole thing compressed, but the height of the wave was very high. We expect that Omicron will simulate the Delta wave. The height of the epidemic may not be as high as second wave, because overall the severity are far less proportionate to infection. So that's very likely. So if you want me to predict when the peak will be, I would guess last week of January, first week of February. And by end of February, early March, mid-March, almost late March, the wave would probably be gone. That is the likely scenario of our third Omicron wave. Now, the issue of how much should be concerned is a matter of how many of us will get severe disease if infected. As far as healthcare workers are concerned, anyone, if you have not taken a second dose, rush and take a second dose. As soon as a booster or precautionary dose is made available, those who are eligible, go for it as soon as possible. And try to avoid getting infected. Mask wearing is an absolute must, because, as I said, saliva has more virus than nasal discharge for Omicron. And so the subclinically infected people, by wearing a mask, will reduce the spread of virus into the atmosphere. Those who are not infected, the ordinary mask is not good enough because it's very leaky. If you can have a tighter fitting mask, 2 layers of mask, or the respirator N95 kind of mask, they will be better for all medical health workers, because that will reduce the inhalation taking in of the virus. No guarantee that you will not get infected, but the chances will be drastically reduced if you wear a good mask and the patient wears the ordinary surgical mask because it's a oral transmission, more of oral than nasal. The third is I wouldn't give vaccines a bad name by saying that Omicron is a vaccine, because Omicron leads to hospitalization. No vaccine adverse reaction will ever lead to that kind of hospitalization. So I wouldn't, repeat that expression that it is almost as good as a vaccine. No, it is almost as bad as a variant. So that will be the way I think messaging should go. Children, the British data show that if you don't do anything and children get infected with any variant, roughly 1 in 200 children may die. That's the British data. 1 in 200 children getting COVID-19, one form or the other, and dying may not look very high because one hospital will have a death and the next hospital will not have a death. A distant hospital may have a death. So we don't kind of add all these things together to know how much death will happen. So it is very well worth preventing that possibility, because our families are one child, two children families. So we need protecting them. Here, it's very important that we don't give a vaccine that is likely to cause adverse reactions of a major type. And there is a little bit of worry about adverse reactions, both with messenger RNA vaccine and with the adenovirus vector vaccine. But the inactivated virus vaccine, quite safe. You can give it without any worry. And most likely, the Covovax and the Corbevax will be equally as safe. So as far as children are concerned, safety has greater weightage than efficacy, because children's risk are lower, and lower the risk, higher the safety requirement. I think for school reopening, okay, another thing. It's very interesting that the 15 to 17 children are more anxious to get vaccine than older people. That shows the an attitudinal difference. Children have learned a lot about the problems, and they want protection for themselves. So they deserve very safe vaccine. And as stepwise age is reduced, say 12 to 17, and later on maybe 5 to 17, the uptake will be very good. But we should ensure that only extremely safe vaccines are given. No vaccine that causes myocarditis, no vaccine that causes thrombocytopenic problems. And so I think for children, we should aim for either the Zydus Cadila vaccine. I do not know enough about the DNA vaccine, but the two spike protein vaccines would quite likely to be the safest, along with the inactivated virus vaccine. And yes, we need to move in that direction. We have already started that journey. We will like to accelerate the journey as supplies would allow us.
Thank you.
Narendra, I have one brief question. The
Yes.
hospitalization duration, is the duration less than in the previous Delta wave?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Indian data is not there. 48 hours ago, a UK data from Imperial College was released, and which shows that hospitalization for more than 24 hours, more than 1 day, is it comes down to 40% of the usual Delta admission. So the duration of hospitalization is also much less with Omicron. So overall, I think probably we may keep on using maybe, might be, etc. But it is very clear that Omicron is a milder disease, but the way it is spreading, because the base is so high, wide, the denominator is so wide, the major concern everybody has, that numerator in terms of those requiring hospitalization and intensive care, it should be in a manner so that it is manageable within our expanded health system today. And I would like to say that today, as of what I understand, the country has 78,000 plus functional ventilators in different parts, and almost 4 lakh ICU beds. So the things have improved remarkably during last 6 months. But if the spread is slowed in whatever way we can, then the pressure on health system will be such that we do not have any difficulty. Oxygen can certainly be said, there won't be any problem in oxygen. Every hospital more than 50 beds now have to have a PSA plant, and otherwise also management has improved.
Dr. Arora, sir, one related question. Do you have any data, Indian data, on the pediatric burden of this Omicron? Because there are a lot of speculations and a lot of questions on the pediatric COVID as far as this Omicron is concerned. And US and some other countries, initially, even in South Africa, initially there were higher admissions and higher burden of infections in pediatric and younger age group. What is the Indian data? Yes, sir.
So I would like to assure all my participants that this data is being very meticulously monitored. And we are seeing the proportion of adult versus pediatric cases, positivity rates, and also the hospitalization rates. And in last 4 or 5 weeks, we have not seen any change. See, last time also during Delta, same kind of news started coming out. And mostly
Yes,
these were from so-called pediatric hospitals where there is a referral bias is taking place. Sometimes we just say that Miss C is very common, it's killing our children. But again, these informations are from pediatric hospitals or specialized hospitals. So I would like to assure that global data does not suggest pediatric propensity for previous variants, and even last 5-6 weeks. Overall, when we look at, there is no kind of unusual pediatric involvement. There is also a possibility that we know from sero surveys that seropositivity in children due to natural infection is almost similar to the adult population. Now, 80% plus of our children are seropositive. And so infection is occurring, but symptomatic or severe disease is very, very less as compared to older population.
Thank you, Dr.
Out of just one more information, and which is follow-up of Naveen's question, that approximately 1,500 children we lost till November end or so, from beginning of the epidemic. And 2/3 of these were in the age group of 15 to 17 years. So that was also the reason. So this is the population which behaves like adults.
Okay, sir. I think we are already 25 minutes over, but you have been watching the question answer box and chat box, and any question you would like to answer from your side, sir?
One issue which several people have raised, and maybe Professor Jacob John can answer to that, the difference between oral swabbing versus nasopharyngeal swabbing. There are various, as far as I know, but I would request sir also to respond, that there is minor difference. In fact, several countries have just moved on to oral swabbing only because of the slight discomfort. And for children now, only oral swabbing is done. and it has more to do with viral load, etc., also. So, but bulk of the countries and communities across the world still feel for adults and nasopharyngeal swabbing is better. Over to Professor Jacob John.
The best swabbing is nasopharyngeal. That is, you go as far as back in the nostril as you can. That used to be the norm for all the variants. When it comes to Omicron, there is a difference. Omicron is predominantly a surface infection. And the pharynx is more affected with Omicron than with other variants, and therefore you start with a sore throat. You feel it. Little bit of nasal discharge. The duration of virus in the upper respiratory tract is shortened. Like Narendra said, about 5 days, the virus will disappear, 5 to 7 days maximum. However, there is one study that has shown that if you keep the swab in the mouth for 30 seconds by moving from underneath the tongue here and then the cheeks, and you collect maximal volume of saliva onto that swab, that is better than a nasal swab, because nasal swab tends to be in, out, or maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds and out. Whereas you can keep the swab in, the oral swab for 30 seconds, your yield is much better. So the current preference is for oral swab with longer duration, particularly for Omicron. I'm not so sure that that is true for Delta. It may not be. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah, one
with-
last question,
Yeah.
Dr. Jacob John, sir. If I remember correctly, the last year in October, you made a statement that the COVID epidemic is over as far as India is concerned. And you and other experts, they have also said India has already moved into an endemic phase. Now you see the Omicron, you have just told us that it is intrinsically less pathogenic than the previous VOC. So do you think it will bring an end to this pandemic by harmlessly increasing our herd immunity? Or is it, you have said that we can eradicate this virus. Do you still hold on these statements?
Okay.
Yes,
As
sir.
far as eradication is concerned, if Omicron came from an animal source, then the writing is on the wall that white-tail deer, well known to be infected, and they spread among themselves. So that is, we have to rethink that question at this moment in time. When the second wave was over, I would say around first week of July, our line was more or less flat. And I have counted almost 25 weeks, it has been flat. 25 weeks is half a year, 6 months. And since November 23 till December 28, the numbers never went above 10,000 per day. So we were actually the first country in the world to move from a wave into what we call endemic. You have to sort of define what duration you will call endemic. I think if 4 weeks it is flat, you're already endemic. That doesn't preclude a subsequent wave. We all know that many endemic diseases come out with outbreaks: influenza, measles, polio. Everything on an endemic phase, you could get an outbreak. So India is the longest surviving endemicity, 6 months. Then next was Taiwan, about, I would say, about 16, 17, 18 weeks. We were 24, 25 weeks, 18 weeks. Then came Japan, about 10, 11, 12 weeks. And Israel had about 6 weeks. Four
Yes, sir.
countries that had come into the endemic-like pattern. All four are having the Omicron surge. So we will not be in the endemic phase now until after the Omicron wave is down. Then I'm sure we will get back to the endemic phase. Will Omicron herd immunity level be sufficient to bring it down to endemic level? Absolutely. Because if you think in terms of the herd immunity threshold approximately, that is what brings the epidemic curve down. And approximately half of that level is the peak. So we know that the wave will come down. We know that immunity will be high. We know that the herd immunity level, the proportion in the community that are immune to that particular virus will be extremely high. How long will that last is something that I cannot predict. I did not predict that the immunity with the earlier variants, including Delta variants, would be so short-lived. I can understand if 2-dose vaccine immunity being short-lived, because pediatricians, we know that the 2 dose is not full immunization. It's only starting the priming. We have to boost, then only the full immunization comes. So that is no surprise. But infection immunity being short-lived has been a surprise. So today, because of the antigenic shift of Omicron, different from antigenic drift of the variants, my guess is that Delta and Omicron will continue to be endemic during the endemic phase, just like H3N2 and H1N1 pandemic 209 are co-endemic, co-circulating. Both are endemic and seasonal. So like that, my guess is that these two, Delta and perhaps a few other variants, Omicron, and perhaps Omicron, already Omicron itself is changing. When it is in human beings circulating, some changes will happen. So Omicron plus kind of thing. These two will probably survive, and these two will predominate in our endemic phase, and we will surely come down to endemic phase after the third wave is over. I would guess by mid-March.
Thank you so much, sir.
Back down less than 10,000 cases a day. We produce 70,000 babies per day. So that is the denominator that will grow up to susceptibility of infection. So out of 70,000 or 60,000 after the mortality and all is over, if 10% of them will get disease, that is 6,000. So we will have an endemic phase for sure, but it will be less than 10,000 per day.
Sir, just a quick question. Will we require
Thank you,
pediatric
sir.
vaccination to maintain that phase or reach there? Will that be helpful?
We have to assume today that routine pediatric vaccination will become necessary until we know more about the epidemiology of this disease. It will be going to be frequent infection, low severity mortality in the endemic phase, but it's not going to be zero. So therefore, vaccination, polio, diphtheria, they're all high infection rate, low pathology, very low mortality. 1 in 1,000 children only developed diphtheria during the time when diphtheria vaccination was not being practiced. So yes, even protecting that one. Similarly, the rare cases of multi-system inflammatory syndrome for children, the rare neonates are particularly vulnerable for severe COVID if they get infected that young. So yes, ultimately, we will have to assume that routine pediatric vaccination will be necessary until we know better in the next 5 years.
So, sir, are you suggesting that SARS-CoV-2 has stopped evolving and Omicron may be the last most evolved variant? What do you suggest? Because WHO has said that by 2020 is going to be the last year of this SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. What are your view about the future?
After the epidemic is over, during the endemic phase, the multiplication would be much less than during the epidemic phase, number one. Number two, the mutational speed will slow down because the virus is now well adapted to human beings. There will be no further need for mutation. Yet mutation can happen. So we'll have to wait and see. We have to keep this under monitoring. All right.
Yes, sir. So we'll keep again a webinar after 2 months to see where we are going.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so
you had one last question. I don't recollect.
Yeah. This is regarding whether this SARS-CoV-2 has just stopped evolving with the
right.
Omicron.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, the Omicron is not in the evolutionary continuum or lineage of SARS-CoV-2 in humans.
Yeah.
This is a sudden, something that's come from some other source, unexpected source. That is a surprise. Will that happen again? We do not know. So eternal vigilance is going to be necessary for the foreseeable future in terms of the coronavirus disease. Eventually, this high pathogenicity will have to give way to a common cold coronavirus. That eventual, will it take 10 years? Will it be only 5 years? Will it be even shorter or even longer? No one can predict. We are going to see this ourselves in front of our eyes in the next coming years. So why predict? Let's watch and see what happens.
Let the miseries continue.
Yeah. So, sir, I remember your last slide in your talks on polio, that when you say the eternal vigilance is the price of the freedom. So it's the same. Yeah. So I hand over to Dr. Mohnish Khatri for vote of thanks. And thanks. Yeah. So Mohnish, are you there? Mohnish Khatri, Secretary Gandhidham. He is not there or what? Yes, Mohnish, go ahead. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. No, he is unmuted, but it's still, yeah. Yes, go ahead. No, not able to hear you. Not able to hear you. I'm sorry.
Unmute.
Problem with your audio connection.
Maybe Jagdish Tinappa can give the vote of thanks.
Okay, Jagdish, go ahead. So before, Jagdish, go ahead. Before that, I just want to say thanks again to my friend, Dr. Balwant Gadvi, who is here with me, President of IMA, and he today is his birthday. But I said if I say that then there will be so many wishes in the chat box. So happy
birthday, Dr. Gadvi.
yeah. Jagdish, go ahead for vote of thanks, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naveen, for asking me to give this vote of thanks. As usual, it was one of the most exhilarating discussion. Vipin, as usual, was posing all the right questions, and we had both the experts giving us all the answers as to what has happened till now. Of course, we still have to wait and see how this is going to pan out in the next few years. So thanks. I thank all from the Child Health Foundation and the IPA and from Chandigarh who have joined in today, and all the participants from all over the world. Thank you very much for in India staying up late, and for many other places probably getting up early to watch this wonderful session. Thank you very much.